that we have been talking about in previous sessions for those who have been here. Nonviolence, truthfulness, non-stealing, being a student of God, not grasping, cleanliness, body, mind, cleanliness, contentment, discipline and discernment, self-study, and devotion. And these 10 virtues are the virtues that every tradition places some great emphasis on. And the reason that there's emphasis placed on virtues is because we need a path to follow. Left to our own devices, we will probably not find our way through the muck and mud of our own humanness. But if we're given a path, if we're told, or if it's suggested to us, what we might experience and how we might deal with that, how we might integrate our experience into our greater overall being, how we might view it, how we might resolve it, and how we might utilize its energy, the wisdom that it brings to us, to commit more deeply and more profoundly to our Dharma, then that path is a gift, and the virtues are the path. So today, I'm going to shift just a little bit, and we are still going to talk about the yama and the niyama, the 10 virtues, but we're also going to start a conversation on the Bhagavad Gita, which is a very important text in yoga, in Advaita Vedanta, and in many traditions it's considered to be a primary text in many traditions that come from India. And this Bhagavad Gita is a conversation between God, who in this text is called Krishna, and a human named Arjuna, a human being, a man who is a warrior, one of the best warriors in the world. And it's basically a Q&A. Arjuna has lots of questions, and Krishna has lots of answers. And this conversation takes place for our benefit, so that if we have questions about how to best apply virtues in our life, we can open up to a page in the Bhagavad Gita and find an answer. When should we apply nonviolence? What is nonviolence? When should we apply self-study? When should we apply discipline? How? Under what circumstances? And why? Why should we do it at all? So there's many ways to come towards studying the Bhagavad Gita, but I suggest that a practical way of studying it is by looking at the virtues that Krishna talks to Arjuna about, because those virtues are in and of themselves the path that you and I can also follow in this life that will minimize our suffering, escalate our inner peace, balance, and a sense of joyful happiness, and support us in the eventual realization of the truth of unity. Without virtues, such as nonviolence, how can we ever even think that unity is possible? When we don't live with a mindset that at least embraces to some degree the idea that each of us can exist in peace and balance with one another, then we are living in the opposite. We're living in the concept of self-defense, of having to protect myself from you. Trust becomes an issue. The world is a violent place. So it's almost one or the other. It's, are we going to live in a light of nonviolence and non-harming to the best of our ability? Or are we going to live according to the insecurity of the ego and the impact and impression that the traumas of our life have left upon us, that we have not come to a moment of reconciliation with yet? So these virtues, they're not just telling you, be a good person. They're actually telling you how to be a good person. They're the explanation, they're the path, they are the answer. And here's an example. The more we adhere to a non-harming life, the less guilt we'll experience. And if you take just a moment and go into your memory and think about the times in your life that you felt really down on yourself, really, judgmental about yourself. Did it have something to do with guilt? Did you feel like a bad person because maybe you hurt somebody intentionally or unintentionally? Guilt has so much power over us, and it's not meant to. Guilt is actually an emotion that is supposed to be a healing emotion. But as with most emotions, we take it and blow it so far out of proportion. Instead of allowing guilt to support us in realigning ourselves with goodness, with non-harming, with grace, with love, with compassion, we take that guilt and we allow it to become a ball and chain of massive proportions that brings us down into the deep water and never lets us up for air. So we've corrupted guilt. The solution for the corruption of this emotion, which is meant, again, to be a healing experience, not a condemning experience, is to practice the virtue that heals it. And that virtue is non-harming. If you don't hurt anybody or yourself, then you don't really have anything to feel guilty about, or you'll have less to feel guilty about. The ego will still work its magic. It'll give you something to think about. But at least it won't be as much. And you'll eventually be able to differentiate between the truth of your actions and the stories that the ego tells us, like, well, you're just not good enough. You always hurt everybody. You're just not a good person. You'll eventually begin to see through the fallacy of those stories and begin to recognize, well, in that moment, I was feeling fearful. So maybe I just need to look at that and see if that's a consistent experience in my life and start addressing that fear versus reacting to it. Does that make sense? Yeah. So we have these virtues, Dayananda.
And just for clarification, when it comes to guilt, there are times when it's more of an error in thinking, where we tend to, because of social conditioning, our life experiences, create guilt for actions that we're taking that aren't maybe necessarily harmful. Like, I had a cookie. Like, it's not the end of the world, but with, health, the health crazes that kind of like sweep over our society, that we tend to guilt ourselves for those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my goodness, that's 99% of it, right? It really is, because then we do something. We do something that's actually harmful, and we don't think too much about it, because the mind is so compelled with, oh my gosh, I ate that cookie. I said I wasn't going to ever have a cookie again. Therein lies the issue, right? Don't say never and always. They're not real. Yes?
Then there's protecting people from themselves and from us, like taking their decisions away from them by saying, we might be hurtful, we might not love them enough, we might not do the right thing, and therefore we'll take ourselves away from that situation and maybe even hurt them more. But the guilt is from kind of treating other people like children and taking over their decisions too and their responsibilities.
Absolutely. And the Bhagavad Gita yoga in general, Advaita Vedanta, Tantra, they all address that, which is a very important idea of self-responsibility. So self-responsibility, self-agency, self-efficacy, the ability to make one's choices based on one's own dharma versus on fear of what others might say or think or judge. And there's clarity that's necessary there as well. What is one's own dharma? You know? What is the dharma of unity? What is the dharma of compassion? What is the dharma of love? Is it that I allow myself to be a doormat for someone? No, of course not. Is it that, you know, I allow myself to take insults at my job from, you know, my superiors? No, of course not. It's that I learn how to strike the balance between my inner relationship with myself and that aspect of God that I have chosen, and my relationship with the outside world. The relationship with the outside world is a very transitory relationship. People come and go, relationships come and go, situations come and go. So we need to walk through the world understanding that. And in an interesting way, putting ourself first. And I don't mean putting ourselves first like the heck with the rest of the world. I mean putting our commitment to the virtues first. Putting our commitment to walking through the world as beings who are on a healing path, who are facing that healing and all that it requires of us, and who is working to not be swayed by the temporary nature of the world and all of its attraction, all of its lure, all of its excitement. So when we put ourselves first, what we're actually saying is we're putting our work first. And then through the lens of that work, through the lens of our work with ahimsa, satya, and asteya, nonviolence, truthfulness, non-stealing, and all the other virtues, then we commit to relationships from the lens of those virtues rather than without them. As you study these virtues, as you start to question, so what is non-harming? What is the role of anger? What is the role of love? What is the role of contentment? What is the role of cleanliness? As we start to question and define these for ourselves, we begin to recognize where our relationships have gone awry, and we begin to correct them. And sometimes that's a really hard thing to do because relationships fall off, especially if the other person isn't willing to change the relationship. But in practicing virtues, we understand that some relationships do need to end so that others can begin, so that others that are healthier can begin. But ending a relationship is not like deleting friends on Facebook, right? So I always say this because this is such a trend. Every once in a while, you'll see somebody go on and make a post. Well, time to clean out my friend list, you know, getting rid of that which doesn't serve me anymore. It's like, no, you're not. No, you're not. You're just making that burden heavier on yourself. Right? Because the moment you hit delete, the 10 things that run through the mind are they going to hate me? Are they going to like me? Are they going to miss me? Are they going to judge me? Are they going to tell everybody? What stories are they? I mean, like this, it just goes.
Are they going to notice?
Are they going to notice? Right? Exactly. Yeah. So when we are working with these virtues and we begin to understand that some relationships will need to end, it's not because we're getting rid of a person, it's because we are committing to change within ourselves that allows us to become the person that our heart longs to be. Someone who is aligned with their dharma. Someone who recognizes that this relationship has served a purpose in some way, shape, or form. It has been part of what has compelled me to do this inner study. And now I need to move into another phase of that. And I'll leave the door open in case the relationship comes back up again at another point in time. But right now, I need to put my focus over here. It's like you're an artist with two canvases in front of you, right? One canvas, you've started, the other canvas is blank. And you've gotten about as far as you can go with the one canvas, but you're not going to toss it in the garbage. You're going to leave it there until the inspiration returns. For now, you're going to go to the blank canvas and begin something on there. Nothing is useless, ever, no matter what it is, no matter what the relationship is. People change, we all do, every single one of us. Healthy boundaries are necessary, absolutely, to keep ourselves safe, to keep our loved ones some perception of safe. But if we are so caught up in rigid boundaries, then we will not have within ourselves the space for non-harming, the space for compassion, the space for healing. There's a difference, wouldn't you agree, between a healthy boundary and a hyper boundary? Absolutely. We don't want hyper boundaries. We want healthy boundaries. Healthy boundaries ebb and flow. They give and take appropriate to the situation. Appropriate to the situation. So we have these beautiful virtues, and again, they're the answer. They're the answer to the query of our suffering, and they are the path to follow. And so if your life right now is at a place where you're feeling a lot of suffering, go to the first virtue, non-violence, non-harming, and ask yourself, in what small way? What small way? Don't be grandiose about it. In what small way can my life become less harmful? And then pick something. Maybe you have a tendency when you go to work that the first thing you say when you walk in the door is, oh, that boss of mine, or that coworker, you know, or you get ready to go over to the water cooler with the gossip, where the gossip happens. Change that. Don't do it. Choose something else. Instead, when you walk in, say, I pray that my boss, my supervisor, has an amazing day today. I pray that that coworker of mine finds moments of peace and joy today. And I'm not going to take part in gossip, because that's a waste of energy. Small little things. And what you'll find is that by committing yourself to exploring the virtues and how they fit in your life, you will inevitably become happier and less riddled with things like guilt, anger. And I don't mean that they won't be there. Slowly over time, your relationship with them will become more appropriate. So guilt will show up when it's supposed to, not just because you had a cookie. Anger will show up more appropriately, not just because someone took your parking spot. Sadness will show up, and you won't push it away so fast. Instead, you'll ask yourself, what is this? What is this all about? Do I need to take a few moments right now and mourn a loss? Do I need to take a few moments right now and acknowledge? You know, I myself am 58 years old now. That's 58 years, right? That's a lot to live in. Certainly there are things I feel sad about. The passing of my husband. Certainly there are still moments, 3 years later, where the sadness comes and I must sit with it. I will not push it out of the way for anyone's convenience, including my own. Instead, I'll hold a space for it. And I'll say, this is a moment that I just really need to be with this. But if my mind is riddled, and of course there are moments when it is, with the misappropriation of my own emotions, then I can't hold that space. It's just too darn uncomfortable. Like, get rid of it, please. I don't want to deal with it. But when I do that, I deepen my suffering. When I hold space for what I'm going through, then I don't deepen my suffering. I deepen my understanding. And in coming into a deeper understanding of myself, I am in the very same moment coming into a deeper understanding of you. And that allows me to be a more compassionate person, to be more patient, to see more clearly where I need to step back and get out of your way. And isn't that an interesting idea, right? That we are actually often in other people's way, they're not in ours. I mean, do you think that person didn't see that parking spot too? Right? We scream at them because they took the parking spot. We were just as much in their way, perceivably, as they were in ours. But when we live from a place of the virtues, we don't see anybody as being in our way. We see it as relationships that are constantly ebbing and flowing, that are constantly giving us the opportunity to come into deeper alignment with our commitments. And sometimes that requires me to step back so that I'm not smothering you. Requires me to let you go and not hold you hostage. Requires me to acknowledge my shortcomings, as well as whatever gifts I might bring to a relationship. But we can only do that with clarity if we're practicing knowing ourselves. And we've come to practice knowing ourselves through walking the path of the virtues. We started off class this morning talking about dilemma, for those of you who were in class. And the Bhagavad Gita starts off with that word, Arjuna's dilemma. This human has such a dilemma. He's so confused, just like we all are. And he's confused by the emotions that have gone awry in his mind. He's called to guilt and anger and fear, just like we all are. This dilemma, acknowledging that it exists, is the first step of our path. We think very grandiose sometimes, and we say, I'm stepping onto the spiritual path, I'm going to fix my dilemmas. How do you fix what you don't know? I mean, we have a commercial boiler downstairs. Would one of you please go down and fix that? Right? You couldn't. Why? Because you don't know it, because you haven't studied it, because you'd walk down there, look at it, and be like, oh my gosh, what is this monstrosity? Right? How can you fix what you don't know? So fixing your dilemma is not the first step on your path of spirituality or your path of yoga. It's acknowledging that you have one and that you don't know very much about it at all. That's the first step. I've got lots of dilemmas, and I don't even know what to call them. So I call them shame and grief and anger. But are they really? So your second step, after acknowledging that these dilemmas exist, is to find out what they are, is to explore, is to be like, well, who am I as a person really? Who do I think I am? How do I relate to people? What are my tendencies? What are my triggers? And that's not a one weekend event. You know, they have these beautiful retreats that say, come be healed. No. I would like to see a retreat that says, come, don't be healed, but learn a little bit about yourself. Right? Because that's what happens. You learn a little bit about yourself. And then typically you leave the retreat, go back to your typical everyday life and forget what you learned. Because that's what we do. We remember and then we forget. We remember and we forget. We remember and we forget. Just like Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. Remember, forget, remember, forget, remember, forget. The great yo-yo. The great spiritual yo-yo. The second step is to explore, investigate what those dilemmas actually are that we are faced with, and how they show up for us, and how we become triggered by them toward behaviors that maybe we could change. And that's not a weekend study, that is a lifelong study. That's many lives long. So patience is important. And in yoga, patience is the third niyama, it's the third virtue of the self-restraints. It's called tapas. Discernment, patience, discipline, goes by many words. But it's so important it made the top 10. That's how important it is to wait, as Rumi said, and have faith in the waiting. That if you do the work, if you commit yourself to the work of self-exploration, if you commit yourself to studying the virtues as they are described in whatever tradition it is that you belong to, inevitably there will be an outcome. But you have to wait for it. And the waiting is not just finger tapping. Is it here yet? Like the kid in the backseat of the car. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? How many of you have driven in the car with a child like that? Yes, totally. Are we there yet? Not a child, right? Not a child with an adult like that. Yeah. Each one of us is that child in this regard, right? Are we there yet? I bought the crystals, am I there yet? I got the t-shirt, am I there yet? I enrolled in yoga teacher training, am I there yet? Like, no, they're all baby steps on a path full of baby steps. And we're not there yet. And the beautiful thing about that is we're not meant to be there yet. You know when we're there? When we're meant to be. And that's not something that any of us can prescribe for ourselves or for another. And that's why it's so important that we meet each other where we're at. Maintaining healthy boundaries. Striving to see clearly. Understanding when virtues are actually being embodied and when they're being misconstrued. And then realigning ourselves with our greater intention. And the greater intention is, like if I asked you, Trudy, what's your intention? What's your greater intention in this life? Do you have one?
Do I have one?
Mm-hmm. Difficult to put into words,
Yeah.
right? Do you have one, Christine? Your greater intention in this life?
Kindness, you know.
Loving kindness?
Mm-hmm.
Dayananda, do you have one?
Two,
Two?
supporting my wife and music.
Supporting your wife in music. Wonderful. So if I asked you, yes, what's yours?
Universal fulfillment.
Universal fulfillment. Wonderful, wonderful. No, I I get that. Totally, right? If I asked each one of you, you would each say something a little bit different. And that's what you would wrap your human mind around. The limitation that you have, the words that create a limitation on where your attention goes to. So if I were to say, well, my life intention is to be of service to society, well, what does that mean exactly? What does it mean to support your wife? What does it mean to bring good music to the world? What does it mean to be kind? What does it mean to not know? And actually, not knowing may be a little more spacious than defining. Because the definition, unless we're thinking deeper, the definition, I'm just going to use yours, Dayananda, for example, of being good to your spouse. What does that mean? How do you define that? What is it to be a good partner? Go deeper with that. What are you actually saying when you say, I want to be a good partner for my spouse? What are you actually saying? Is it just your spouse that you want to be a good partner for? Or is it every single person you encounter? that you want to be in a healthy relationship with. And then go even further, go even deeper, and ask yourself, what is it to be in a healthy relationship? Is it to be universally aligned? Is it to be kind? Go deeper than that. What is it to be universally aligned? What is it to be kind and compassionate? Is to begin to touch on something that is difficult to explain or describe, but that we have put a word to: oneness, unity. No matter whether we're seeking it from our spouse, from our friends, from our family, or from everything everywhere, to come into an alignment with this concept of oneness, this concept of unity. And in order to do so, we must be good people. Not flawless people. That's not possible. But honest people. People who don't go out of their way to hurt other people. People who don't steal. You know, not just material things, but love, right? Or time. Or light. Or intention. Must be people who don't grasp and aren't greedy. People who are actually interested to know what that universal alignment actually is. People who are working on their cleanliness of their body, but cleanliness of their mind more so. Cleanliness of their actions. Are they reproachable or are they not reproachable? People who are disciplined and know what self-responsibility, that was a mouthful, what self-responsibility actually is, and how to accept that responsibility without it becoming a burdensome weight that steals joy from us. Discipline is not a burdensome weight. Self-responsibility is actually freedom. It is actually freedom. But it is a kind of freedom that is not for the weak-minded or the weak of heart. It is a kind of freedom that says, I'm willing to accept. I am willing to accept the consequences of my actions. And I am also willing to behave in a manner that has fewer harsh consequences intended. So in other words, I will not go out of my way to hurt you. I will not hurt you out of convenience. I will not hurt you out of greed or fear. I will not hurt you. I will not take the first swing. I will not instigate you. I will not. I will step back and away and let you have your space. So taking all of those intentions and going deeper and understanding that the very depths of the ocean. Remember when, some of you are like my age in here. Remember on, I don't know if it was Jacques Cousteau or the National Geographic program that used to be like on Sunday night at 6 o'clock or something, when they first discovered those deep sea fish that looked like crazy, those big teeth and that little eye thing hanging out, right? It was like the first pictures of this that came up from the bottom of the ocean. How many of you remember that when they first started talking about that? Because they had hit levels of the ocean that nobody had explored before. And they found that there were these deep sea creatures that were tubular and gave off some kind of toxic smoke. And they found, do you know what those fish are called? Do you know the ones I'm talking about? They're
anglers.
Are they anglers? Deep sea anglers? I think maybe, yeah. They're kind of.
They have a couple names, but
they're kind of crazy looking. They're clear.
Yeah.
They're almost see-through, and they have those big teeth. Yeah. Well, in a funny way, you exploring your Dharma is kind of like that, right? You can be on the surface of the ocean where everything is really super safe because you think you understand it all, but you don't really, but you think you do. or you can dive deep, and you can go to the deepest depths of the universal ocean and find the anglers, right? Only to find out that they're actually quite exquisite and amazing and really something to behold. Your Dharma is like that too. There's these superficial ideas of what your Dharma is. And then there's the deep, deep definition of it that has more to do with unity and mystery and love and being and divinity. That which is sacred. I haven't talked a whole lot about that in this session yet, because practically speaking, unless you are deeply embedded in a tradition, to come at this from a religious or a spiritual place for some people is a very hard thing to do if they're not spiritually motivated. How do you make somebody religious? You don't. You talk to them about the practicality of their own suffering, their own life, their own happiness. And then as they investigate that, many people will discover a relationship with the sacred, with God, with Goddess. But initially, many people are put off by that, especially in today's world. A lot of people are put off by religion, by the larger organization, the hierarchy that tends to impose. But those are human hierarchies, not God's hierarchies. God doesn't have hierarchies. God has wisdom and ignorance. Right? Krishna tells Arjuna this in the Bhagavad Gita. In response to Arjuna's questions, to Arjuna's dilemma, Krishna says, when you have a dilemma, you are being ignorant. You are caught up in ignorance. You are not seeing clearly. When the dilemma fades, when you resolve and reconcile yourself, you have come into wisdom. And the key between those two places is relationship with divinity. When we don't see everything that exists as God, as oneness, as evidence of our unity, then we are in some way, shape, or form ignorant. And that's when we are more likely to contort our grief, contort our anger, and all of our other emotions to bend to the whims of the ego and to increase our suffering. But when we can at least a little bit, just a little bit, recognize this too is sacred. This too is divine. This too has purpose. This too has within it the opportunity for myself or another to come into a deeper alignment with their Dharma. Then there's wisdom to be discovered there. And the statement alone is wisdom. And in the midst of that, suffering will diminish, will not go away, not all the way, but it can lessen in its intensity. And the reason it lessens in its intensity is because we have put our mind to goodness. We have put our mind to alignment. Body, mind, soul, divinity. We've decided that there's something more. We've decided faith has a place here in my heart and in my life. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it was my intention to come in and to talk about the Bhagavad Gita, but and a little bit about the yamas and niyamas. There's so much that can be said, and this is 1 hour of a conversation. So please know that some things, they sound so simple, but they're not really, and other things sound really complicated, and maybe those are the simple things that we just make complicated. But let's all start at one place, and let that place be doable, and let it be the first step, nonviolence. In what way in your own life, toward yourself or another, can you minimize violent tendencies? And violence isn't just putting your fists up and hitting somebody. There's violence in words, there's violence in actions, there's violence in presence. Like, have you ever been near somebody who's putting off really violent vibes and you feel that? And how did you feel? For those of you said yes, you said that you've experienced. How did that make you feel as someone who encountered that energy coming from another person?
That I had to defend myself in some way, that there was something I had to do.
Yeah. So it made you feel defensive, maybe fearful.
And protective of other people. Is there anything we can do to try to problem solve and
Right.
diffuse a situation? Do I need to call anyone?
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we experience that in another person, we can be pretty much assured that that also comes from us from time to time. And when it comes from us from time to time, we're causing others to feel that very same way. Swamiji would say, and all the Swamis at some point or another would say, and it says in the Bhagavad Gita too, the yogi who is well established in ahimsa, in non-violence, no one will be afraid of them. No one will feel defensive. The animals will come to them, sit by their side. One of the earliest figures, they believe, that is related to yoga is a picture of Prajapati, which is another name for Shiva. And he's sitting in meditation and he's surrounded by animals. And it's said that that's nonviolence. That even the wild animal loses its fear of you. Be like that walking through the world. Let your demeanor be such that it doesn't cause another human being to recoil from you in fear. There are moments when you must be fierce, but these are not those. And fierce is also an interesting thing, because while we say there are moments where, yes, of course, there are moments in a violent world where you must be fierce in your healthy boundaries, the fierceness eventually doesn't come from a place of anger or fear either. We had in the past few years these amazing movements in the world, the Me Too movement, such potential there, such fierceness there. But some part of that became fierce by a different kind of anger that we could call vengeful. That's not what we're talking about here. Fierceness with vengeance is not in line with the virtues. Vengeance is not in line with the virtues. Fierceness, standing up for those who are downtrodden. Fierceness, adhering yourself to the truth. Not just the human opinion of truth, but the truth of unity. The truth that I'm just as responsible for you as you are for me, and together we're responsible for a lot. And if I myself take the responsibility to come forward and pray that you take the responsibility to come forward, then together we can make this world into a much better place for all. No vengeance there. Only a willingness to do the good work. Only a willingness to be of service. Only a willingness to do good, to be good. Arjuna is a warrior after all. He's a warrior. He's been a warrior for his whole adult life. He's fought in wars. What makes him a great warrior is that he's ethical. What makes him a great warrior is not that he kills for the play of it. Not that he he goes to battle because he hates people. Not that he picks fights because he's the world's greatest archer and he can beat anybody. It's not out of competition. What makes him a great warrior is that he's humble. What makes him a great warrior is that he is inclusive. What makes him a great warrior? He said to Krishna, post Bhagavad Gita, I believe it was, or maybe just, no, it had to be after the Bhagavad Gita. Later on in the larger book, the Mahabharata, there's these two little birds on the ground, and there's a female and a male, and they have a nest of eggs. And in the middle of this battle that happens, the little bird comes up and starts yelling at Krishna. How can you have this battle right here? I have my wife and my nest here, and there's eggs in that nest. And Krishna is listening to this little bird telling him up. God is listening to this little bird. It's quite a beautiful little story. And Arjuna is looking at Krishna and he's like, what do we do? And Krishna said, give me your helmet. And so he took the helmet and he put the helmet over the bird in the nest. And then at the end of the battle, he came back and removed the helmet. And the little bird and the nest were fine. That's how we look out for each other. May my actions never impose upon you consequences of a harmful nature. And if they do, I'm sorry. That was not my intention. Does that make sense? Okay. These ethics are not meant to be the kind of discipline that is cold and harsh and unallowing. These ethics, these virtues, are guideposts. We all ask at some point or another, how do I live a happy life? Everything sucks. How do I live a happy life? And we say, well, what parts of your life are you in a place right now that you can begin to explore your relationship with these 10 virtues? We say 10, they encompass all of them. Whatever name you want to put to a virtue, gratitude, it's there. Love, it's there. But we say, but these 10, they have something very specific about them. There's an actionability to them. There's an actionability to nonviolence, to non-harming. And when nonviolence is not present in your life, when it's just too easy to look and say, well, I'm violent there and I'm harmful there and I'm violent there and I'm harmful there, then you can go to the second yama, truthfulness, and maybe recognize that nonviolence is absent because you haven't been being truthful with yourself. So now start practicing truthfulness. Truthfulness about what? What triggers you? Truthfulness about your motivations. Truthfulness about how much you really care about how your actions impact yourself and others. Truthfulness about your fears. And you can look and say, well, when I'm not truthful, then this idea of non-stealing is something that I need to practice. I need to practice non-stealing because in not being truthful with myself, I'm actually stealing from myself the opportunity to be at peace, to be harmonious, to be happy. When I'm harmful, I'm stealing from others the ability to feel secure and safe. There's lots of examples that we can put to that. And when non-stealing is not present, then we can go to brahmacharya. Brahmacharya, charya, student, or to be like, or to go after. Brahma, God, to be a student of God. And so if I'm stealing and I'm not being truthful and I'm harming, then I'm not being a student of God. And if I recognize that, then I can go to the fifth yama, which is aparigraha, non-grasping, and I can release. I can look at my life, what needs to be released? What do I need to stop grasping onto? What burdens can I set down? In what way can I free myself, even just a little bit, so I have a little bit more breathing room, a little bit more room for my imagination, to envision myself as a healthy person, as a good person, as a genuine person, and then practice that. What do I need to put down, to put to the side, to acknowledge, of course, but then let go of, so that I can come into this new practice. It's like New Year's is coming up, right? How many of you think you might have, New Year's resolution of joining a gym, right? So that's like the number one resolution in the United States is that New Year's, I'm going to join a gym. Well, what do they have to put to the side to join the gym? Something. You can't just make more hours in a day. So they limit something so that they can join the gym. Well, this is the same thing. It's just a bigger intention. It's like you put something else, give it less importance, so that you can apply more importance to the thing that you actually need, which is the practice of the virtues, because that is what is going to bring you to a place of greater understanding yourself and all others, as well as a greater place of healing and peace. Any reflections or questions? Kelly.
Thank you for your insight and wisdom. It was interesting when I was thinking of the anglerfish, and you said to go deeper into our own dark ocean. Well, the anglerfish, the thing that hangs above it is like a light. So you're really sort of searching for your light within the depths of darkness. So without knowing it, you made another great
That's beautiful.
metaphor.
Look at that. Oh no, the angler did it all. Actually, God did it all, right? The divinity, whatever you call that, God, goddess, that's what did that. Wow, what a profound statement. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions or reflections? Dayananda, would you like to contribute anything? No questions? So you all got it?
You got it.
Right?
Done.
1, 2, 3, done. If only it were so simple, but it's not. When you come into the yin practice or any yoga practice, in many classes, and most definitely in my classes, I'll ask you to pay attention to what you're feeling. I'll ask you to notice the difference between pain and discomfort. And I will invite you to remove yourself from the situations that cause you pain, but to sit with the discomfort. Because that's training for life. That we recognize what causes pain and what is merely discomfort. And we adjust within ourselves, we realign ourselves so that we are more resilient, so that we are not bringing about more pain for ourselves or for others. But all the while understanding that discomfort is going to be there because it's just part of your human experience. You're not going to escape it. You're going to suffer the loss of loved ones. You're going to stub your toe and scrape your knee. You're going to. You were born and you're going to die, the physical body. And the biology of that physical body defines a level of suffering that is going to happen to all of us. Life is not perfect. And then it is. But spiritually speaking, it's a whole different story. Because even in those moments of great discomfort, when the biology is doing its thing, there is always space, spiritually speaking, for joy. There's always space for hope, for faith, for celebration, I believe it was Gandhi who said, one of the most beautiful things is the joy that is present in even the poorest of people. And when I went to India, I saw this myself firsthand. Certainly there are people who are, suffering and they don't have enough food to put on their table, and, they don't live like we do. They don't have windows in those openings. They just have openings. They don't have a door in that doorway, they just have an opening. They have like 2 pairs of clothes, maybe 1 pair of clothes. But you know what was beautiful about them? Everyone that I encountered in this particular village that I'm thinking of said the same thing. Come in, let me show you my home, let me feed you. Can I give you some water? It was not about, what can you give me? It was about, what can I give you? How can I support you? So people who had what we in the West would perceive as nothing wanted to give you everything. Of course, there's other people too, just like there are here. Yes, Carissa.
Just a reflection that a memory that came up when I was over this past summer when I was in Costa Rica. I experienced the same thing you did in India, where there was this homeless man on the beach, and he spoke no English, but we communicated through Google Translate, and he was the sweetest man. He lived on the beach, and anytime he had a hammock or shoes or clothes, they got stolen from him. But he was the sweetest man, and we would try and help him out. We, bought him a pair of flip-flops since the ground was so hot, and we would buy him meals. And every time we bought him something, he would make this bracelet for us out of plastic bags. He would collect these plastic bags that would be on the sand, and we watched him. He would tie it to a tree and make these beautiful bracelets for us anytime we would do something for him. And experiences like that, I always tell people, it humbles you so much, so much. Someone who, as you said, as people would perceive have nothing, have the biggest hearts, and that means more than anything, and they are grateful just to have the ocean to wake up to in the morning, and to have where they're laying, there's shade from the sun, and it's so beautiful to see and experience that, and see that there's, although they have, despite no roof or a door or anything of that, they have so much gratitude still in their heart. It's a beautiful thing to see.
Yeah. And they're there for so many different reasons, including to inspire us when we forget. Yeah. Because we're each other's teachers, right? We're each other's teachers. Yes.
And things come and go in that flow. There's a balance, and we have, if you identify the 10 virtues, you can't be focusing on each one at the same time. And we get this idea of acceptance, and it's not very generous in our culture. Acceptance is not even generous. It's embracing what you see around you as a way to raise your level of experience of those virtues. So when you see something, it's like, how did I get here, and what is that challenging me to do? Which virtue should I be focusing on right now? How can I best be of service with what the world is showing to me? And that's where the mystery and wonder and joy grow more, because you're going into it with, oh, this is wonderful. It may look ugly to our aesthetics, but how is this making me a better person? How can I contribute back to it?
Yeah.
And that give and take brings more joy even in the most difficult times.
Yeah. One of the prime motivators for many human beings is I don't want to be alone. Right? And when we come to each other's service in such a way that is generous and, you know, humble and meaningful, then we know we're not. Then we know we're not. Both the giver and the receiver know they're not alone. And that in and of itself brings joy, for sure. Yeah. Wonderful. Yes.
It's a little simplistic, but I liked how you were talking about guilt, and we have this little practice, my wife and I, when we're trying to make a simple decision, and it's like, oh, what do we do, Vata brain? And usually one of us wants to do one thing, the other wants to see a different movie, you know? So we'll rock, paper, scissors, and then it's the disappointment that one of us feels, if it's like just a little too much, that's the indicator, and we're like, all right, we're gonna do that. 'Cause I don't care that much, I wanted to see this, but you felt so disappointed, and we both give that to each other, but that's how the emotions are, they're indicators. And that's like a small thing that we're never really too attached to anyway, but the bigger things, the bigger choices that you have to make, at least my understanding is, you go ahead and you make the choice that you're going to make, and in essence you live with it. And when the guilt arises because maybe you didn't make the choice that was most in line with you, you don't then beat yourself up about it, you recognize the guilt, and that's where the skill comes in, and you can sit with that for a moment, and then it's like, okay, I made that decision, what am I going to do differently next time, right? Or how can I adjust, because it's all, like you said, this experience of learning and growing. And so we're going to make the mistakes, but the mistakes themselves are going to teach us where our values and what we want and what we need in our lives really, where all of those things lie within our lives. At least that's how I've always kind of perceived it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. Absolutely. We don't know. Yeah.
I'm laughing because we get so calm and patient in this environment, and I had a situation where I have a 15-year-old and an 8-year-old. My
Bless you.
15-year-old is 6'2", and the 8-year-old is half his size. And they had a friend over who's like another son, is the same size as my oldest one. They were in the basement playing, and I'm upstairs, like, they're gonna work it out. They're fine, they're gonna work it out. And they're wrestling and all of that, and I finally hear like screaming. I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna run down there. I'm just not gonna run down there. Finally, I slowly walk down. The older one has the little one hung upside down, and he's scared. He's truly frightened. And so I feel that protectiveness and anger and fear and all these things coming out. Calming myself, going down one step at a time. I get the little, like, put him down now. So your voice changes. You've got the voice of God. Down now. Puts him down, comes over to me, holds on to me, and I'm like, the other friend goes running and says, I'm gonna go get some water. The big one's like, he's so big, but he starts to run around the table away from me. Never do that again. And then by the time it's like, calm down, he's calm down. It's like, just come here, okay, come on, we're gonna do this. And then we hit the heavy bag together, got out of the system. But it was funny, it's just the change in, he's afraid of me. And because I'm going to do the protective thing. I've got the one, and then there's the other one, but it's that intensity that happens. So you may be going along all calmly and peaceful and letting things happen, and then there's a true danger. So there's the 15-year-old who may drop the 8-year-old on the concrete floor on his head.
Yeah. See, and that's a really wonderful example, because there's this practice of clarity, right? So when we're walking through the world, kind is not nice, and nice is not kind. They're not the same thing. Nice is the way we behave when we want people to like us or to think we're nice. Kind is the way we behave when we are committed to nonviolence. We behave in a kind way, in a way that doesn't go out of its way to inflict harm on others. But when we see something happening that needs your direct attention and awareness, then the voice does change, and it becomes what my children lovingly call mom's voice. Yeah, and that's when they go, whoa. But it's not a voice that is absent of love. It is a voice that is clear, very, very clear, and that is committed to a level of truth that what I am seeing right now is incorrect. This is incorrect. It needs to stop now, so let's stop. It's the voice from inside of you coming out that recognizes the difference between ignorance and wisdom, that sees that there is a place where harm can happen and that this can be reconciled so that less harm happens. And the response of the other person, while the kids, being drama that they are, may say, you scare me when you're like that. But you know, later in life they come to you and they say, I really appreciated when I heard that voice, because it let me know there is a clear boundary, that there is always a clear boundary, and that if I don't see it, it's just because I'm not willing to. That clear voice actually provides stability, security, as long as it's not married with vengeance and vehemence. When the clear voice becomes distorted, and this is what tends to happen, you know, sometimes mom has that clear voice and then it escalates like an avalanche, right? And it's like, and the last time, and the time before that, and you always, and you never, and you know, we all do that, right? We go from clarity to escalation. And in the escalation is where we lose the straightforwardness. Then it becomes something else that is not useful. I love that in child psychology they say, Lydia, you got a little baby at home. She hears the first 3 to 5 words, that's it. So remember that while she's growing up. Don't escalate. Children and adults hear the first 3 to 5 words, so be clear about what you're saying. Clear. Don't escalate. Or, you know, go into areas that you don't need to go to. Give people the opportunity to find stability in your messaging. Yeah, wonderful. All right, I've kept you long enough now. So YTT, you're going to stay in the room, and I'm going to tell you in a few moments what we're going to do for the next 20 minutes or so. And everybody else who's staying for lunch, you'll go down to the kitchen. They have prepared an amazing lunch for you today. The wonderful Linda did the cooking, and I do think it's Liz downstairs today who's doing the serving alongside Linda. So please be gracious to them and thank them for their hard work. And let's sit tall, and we'll close the eyes. Draw the hands together in front of the heart. Divine Mother, beloved one, shower us with your grace, your wisdom, your love. Allow us to see clearly, to know deeply, to understand fully the path of our Dharma. Give us the strength and the courage to embody that path, and the resiliency to continually come back to a place of greater knowing in the moments of forgetfulness. Protect us, keep us safe. Empower us to protect each other and to be lights walking through this world. Let us spread the peace and the oneness. We'll lift our voices in one Om. May we be the oneness. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Thank you all so much for being here today. So good to gather with each and every one of you. Enjoy your lunch. And I hope to see you next week. So we are gonna, just before you leave, we are gonna have some changes in December. Masks will become optional. We do adhere to CDC guidelines. If you're not vaccinated, we strongly suggest that you wear your mask for greater protection. We understand that it doesn't guarantee that a person will not become infected if they're vaccinated, but the likelihood is much, much lower. So, and we just want everybody to be safe and well and happy. We will also, we're not sure if we're going to continue taking temperatures at the door or not, but at least for the month of December, you'll still come in at door number 7 and wait at the way station there to be checked in. And we may also have a few additional classes on the schedule in December, so keep an eye out for